I did again store the code we wrote in the last lectures in a brand new file and package in a subfolder, and I did set up a new main.go file which contains errors though. We're going to continue with that Go file and fix those errors, and hence you find this main.go file attached to this lecture. Now in this main.go file, we have code that looks similar to what we had before, just a bit shorter. I have a transform numbers function, and this function, just as before, takes another function as a second parameter. Here I'm not using a custom function type, instead I wrote the type in the long form, but it's still a function type. Now the logic in the function hasn't changed. I'm still calling this transform function, which I'm getting as a parameter, here inside of that loop. Now we're getting an error because here when I call transform numbers, I'm not passing in a value for this function parameter. And I don't have the double and triple functions from before anymore. Because in this lecture, I want to dive into a new feature which is related to what we learned before. I want to dive into anonymous functions. Now what's that? Well, in programming in general, and therefore also in Go, when you have a case where a function wants another function as a parameter value, or where a function returns a function, then you often can save some effort and time by using anonymous functions, which is a feature that allows you to define a function just in time when you need it instead of in advance. Now before, in the code we wrote before, I defined double and triple in advance. I created them as regular functions with the func keyword and their names. Now nothing wrong with that, but here, if I just want to do that transformation and I need a function here that doubles all my numbers, I might not want to write a brand new double function. Because maybe I only need the double function once, and for the next transformation I need a different function, different logic. In that case, you can write a function here in place of these three question marks. You can write a function with the func keyword here, no name, but instead just the parentheses for the parameters, then your return value, and then the function body with parentheses. And here we could say we want a number, which is an integer, and we will return an integer. And in this function, I will return number times 2. Like this. The logic is up to you though. This is valid. This is a valid way of writing this, with or without the blank here, by the way. That doesn't matter. Now, this here is a so-called anonymous function. It's not a function type, because we're not writing this in a place where a type is expected, but in a place where a value is expected. We are calling another function and we're passing in values for these parameters after all. So this here is not the type of a function, but really the function itself. It's the place where I previously passed double or triple. That's what I passed here as a second parameter before. Now I'm passing in a brand new function that's written just in time. This is an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. We can't call it anywhere else in our code, therefore, because it doesn't have a name. But if we have a place where a function is needed as a value, we can just create that function in that place, as I'm doing it here. Then, besides the fact that it doesn't have a name, it works just as you learned it. You can take parameters, as many as you want, and you can return values, as many as you want. Of course, we have some restriction though, as this is the value for another function, for the parameter of another function. Of course, the function type defined down here, when we accept this parameter, has to match the type of the function we are creating here. So here I can't start accepting a string as a second parameter. This would be a valid function, but it's not a valid function for this parameter, which wants only one parameter in that function that is received, and that one parameter should be an integer. So this function, which we create here, would not meet the requirements of this parameter. Hence we have to get rid of that extra parameter in that other function here. But now with that it would work, and that would be a valid anonymous function. And the advantage is that if you just need to add such a function real quick, and you don't plan on calling it in any other places of your code, then you don't need to define an extra function. Instead, you can define it in the place where you need it, and that can also make your code more readable, because other developers, if they want to see what your function does, don't have to search for your function somewhere in the file, as we have to do it in the example before. If I want to find out what double does, if I can't guess it by the name, I have to search for the double function. Here it is. With an anonymous function, I don't have to do that. Of course, if you do plan on performing that same logic in different places of your code, storing it in a named function and referring to that named function here instead would be preferable, since you otherwise have to copy and paste your code a lot. So it's a trade-off and simply depends on your application. But anonymous functions can be useful if it's a one-off task and you don't need to reuse the logic, and then you can write them like this.